Madam Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs, I think we're ready to begin. And so Erica will unmute both of you. Just to remind everyone else, we have allowed everyone into the meeting. All of your microphones will be muted until the question and answer period. And then you will be unmuted by the city clerk when it is your turn to speak. And we'll go through those rules in just a few minutes, but we will turn the time over to the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs for their opening comments. Madam Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our number 3 meeting of the Law Enforcement Ad Hoc Committee. I want to thank you for being here today and for sticking with us. We're halfway through. There's much work to be done still, but it will take all of us working together to get there. I want to remind everybody that, you know, we need to engage in a respectful and honest manner, and that lived experiences are unique to each of us. So what is true for me may not certainly be true for someone else, but we owe each other that respect to understand and to see things from different perspectives. That's how we're going to get to where we need to go. I also want to remind everyone this is going to be an ongoing process. Our goal is to have a draft report with some recommendations to present to council on September 16, but that is not the end of this journey. That is not the end of this work. This work is going to continue, and it's going to be an ongoing process. And your participation has been incredibly important, and will take all of us moving together to get to where we need to go. So again, thank you so much for being here this morning, and I look forward to a great discussion today, and I will turn it over to Councilmember Spriggs.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I also want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. I know it's a sacrifice to give up, you know, part of our Saturdays for this exercise, but this is really important for Imperial Beach, and I'm very grateful for all of the community input. And we've tried to keep these meetings as open as possible because we want your opinions. And today is no exception to that, as we today are going to, as Andy will, our city manager, Andy Hall, will note in a minute, we're going to really focus today on alternatives to the use of sworn deputies or armed deputies. Given that last week or 2 weeks ago, you might recall that we revealed data from the sheriffs that showed that 90% of the calls are, quote, non-emergency, unquote. We need to really get a better understanding of what non-emergency means, and we're exploring with the sheriff what they define and what categories of responses are included in non-emergency, and that will guide our drafting. And obviously alternatives to armed deputies will be for those non-emergency situations or some categories of them. So we want to explore those alternatives today before we know fully what the applicable situations might be. And we look forward to your input because that's going to help us write the first draft of the report. Again, following up on what Mayor Pro Tem said, we really have a very diverse community here in lots of ways. A lot of different views on how to go, what we need in terms of policing, what we need in terms of a number of public services, including public safety. And I love being a city councilman and trying to understand and reconcile all the different views and opinions in Imperial Beach. Nobody is 100% right. Nobody is 100% wrong. And I think as long as we respect each other and their opinions, we will be able to have a really fabulous community and a successful outcome for this process that we're in right now with the Law Enforcement Review Ad Hoc Committee. So thanks for your participation, and I look forward to the discussion. Over to you, City Manager Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you, Councilman Spriggs. Let me get our program going here. The one thing I wanted to do also is make sure that the public is aware that we are working with some local consultants here who are adding a lot to the process. We have Dr. Keisha Clark, who also works for San Diego County, does a lot of inclusion training and just does a lot of things for the county. And she was introduced last week, so I won't spend a lot of time as well as Mike Gray, who's the executive director of what's both been called the Regional Training Center and the Government Training Agency, but they do a lot of employee training for the government agencies here in San Diego County. So we thank them for their help and their effort as we move forward through this process. But we wanted to summarize real quickly a couple of the previous meetings. The first meeting, we talked about the timeline, the report when it's due to the City Council. It was mentioned this morning. We are going to try to have the report to the City Council on September 16th. And so that's coming right up. The first meeting, we dove a little bit into the finances of the city. We had a financial overview of not just the public safety portion of the city's budget, but the budget in general, so that people had a better feel for the finances of the city. In our last meeting, and then we also talked a little bit about, in our last meeting, the contract that we have with the San Diego Sheriff's Department. And we reviewed some of the current use of force policies so that people were aware of where we're beginning from, so that there was at least some baseline of data. So where we are today, as you can see here, we talked in the first meeting about the financial framework, the outline of the meetings, whatnot. So we have accomplished that task. The second one, we reviewed the contract and some crime data and the use of force. And where we are today is I've been asked to put together at least some information that might spur some discussion about the exploration of alternative services, maybe the possibility of using some county services, whether that might be the South Bay Community Services or other health and human services that are provided by the county, community service officers, maybe, other things, maybe a phased approach, because some of these things might take some time to put in place. So that's going to be the focus of today's meeting. And so I'll just kind of move right into that. So the agenda essentially is an overview of what other jurisdictions might be doing. One in particular that I wanted to take a look at because I had a chance to meet with the lieutenant in charge of the Crisis Assistance Helping Out on the Streets program, or CAHOOTS, in Eugene, Oregon. That particular program, of course, has received a lot of interest lately. The day that I was able to meet with the lieutenant, our meeting was ended because CNN showed up, because CNN started to interview him, because he's getting about 200 calls per day on average from other police departments looking at what's happening in Eugene, because it has been somewhat successful, and the police there very much support it. And then I've been asked to look a little bit about maybe looking at community policing best practices and the use of force best practices as kind of a look back at some of the conversations we've had, and then we'll open it up to some community comments and discussion. So I wanted again to talk about the CAHOOTS program in Eugene, Oregon. A couple of weeks ago, or it's been actually a couple of months ago, I had an opportunity to go to Eugene, Oregon, and I didn't go to talk about CAHOOTS. I went to talk about my grandson, Luca. So I had that, Paloma retired scout, and she got her dog in the structure slide, and you saw how fast I moved through it this time because my dog Scout was such a movie star, but now Luca's the movie star. But anyway, I was up visiting my grandson in Eugene, Oregon, and took the opportunity to set up a meeting with the Eugene Police Department to talk about the CAHOOTS program. So I wanted to kind of go through a little bit of the basis of the CAHOOTS program. The program is one of the older programs about the new community policing models that we've seen in the United States. It's a little bit older than most. They started the program in 1989, so it's been around for about 30 years. So they've been able to fine tune that program. Eugene Police Department contracts with a nonprofit agency to, quote, provide, quote, support for the Eugene Police Department personnel by taking on many of the social service style calls for service, including crisis counseling. And then further in their documentation, CAHOOTS, quote, often provides initial contact and transport for intoxicated persons, mentally ill or disoriented persons, as well as transport for necessary non-emergency medical care. And so when I was talking with him, I asked him what that meant. So a lot of that might be non-injury accidents, but the car now is incapable of being driven. So what they can do now is they can transport someone either to their home or maybe to a place of shelter until someone can come pick them up. But oftentimes that's what we are having our uniformed officers do at the scene of an accident. So that's what they do in at least Eugene for some of the, that's would be that necessary non-emergency medical care. And then the CAHOOTS is dispatched right from the Eugene Police Department service channel. So they have all the calls. They have fine-tuned which calls goes to Cahoots, which calls go to the police department. And then they have vans that are staffed with both a medic, an EMT or a nurse, and an experienced crisis worker. So they have really focused in on the non-emergency medical calls and things like homelessness and mental illness. That has been what they have really focused on and tried to relieve the Eugene Police Department from those types of calls. So the recent history of the Cahoots program, in 2014, they were answering about 9,600 calls. And by 2019, and they said in the last 6 years, it has really taken off. Of course, as social programs and social issues have become a little bit more understood by society, this program has really taken off for them as well. So by 2019, they had increased their number of service calls for service to over 18,000. And just to put that into perspective a little bit, the Eugene Police Department calls for service. There's about 105,000 calls for service in 2019. And then the Cahoots calls for service were 18,583. So about 1 in 5 calls goes to the Cahoots and the others go to the police department. So they responded to about 18% of the calls. And the lieutenant told me that that's about but the Cahoots program costs about 2% of the budget. So you can see there's some economies of scale there. Typically the EMTs, social workers, just by their nature, by the equipment that they have, the training that they have, tend to be somewhat less expensive in terms of fully burdened rates than uniformed sworn officers. And again, lots of times, remember when we're talking about these costs of sworn officers, they're not taking this money home. A lot of that is cars and vehicles and equipment and retirement and insurance and some of those kinds of things. But essentially, typically, the EMTs and the social workers have been less expensive than the total burden costs for uniformed officers. So in the discussion that I had with the lieutenant, and we have his contact information, and he was very helpful and very open to even if we wanted at some point to joining one of these meetings and answering calls from our residents. He said that these are some of the insights he had for me. One, their program has been developed over 30 years. So it does take some time. It took them some time to find that groove, to understand what calls are best handled by the Cahoots program, which ones are best handled by the police. But they are very, very supportive of the program. And he said that's the biggest key. You have to have buy-in from the law enforcement in your community. And if you do, it can be very successful. If it's built up as a competition rather than an augmentation of your police services, he's afraid that it might be less successful. We did talk about the fact that Imperial Beach is a smaller community and we don't have the economies of scale of Eugene. Now, Eugene's not a large city. Eugene's only about 150,000. So it's not like it's a major metropolitan area, but it's certainly, much larger than Imperial Beach. So we may have to look at partnerships with some of the county services, maybe South Bay Community Services, maybe the county health department, and that might take some time to create. But I did want to tell you that we have had some initial conversations with both the sheriff's department and some of the people at the county, and they do have some programs that could be augmented for these types of services in our community. But again, that might take us a little bit of time to create and fine tune those programs. And then he said what's really key is that most of the people contacting him right now across the nation are really everything, and in Imperial Beach, let's be honest, it's at least part of our concern as well, is that a lot of people are trying to find ways to keep up with the costs of law enforcement, that the costs are exploding. At least in Eugene, the program was not created for financial reasons, although the services are less expensive, but it was really created to allow sworn officers to concentrate on crime and emergency issues and to align their calls with personnel best qualified to address the situation. They were finding at least 30 years ago and since they fine-tuned the program, that there are people that are more aligned to deal with mental health issues, maybe even physical health issues than the police officers. Trained EMTs, trained social workers, some of those kinds of people are maybe better qualified or at least more comfortable dealing with those situations than the sworn officers. So I think it's important to note that in Eugene, it wasn't about money and it really wasn't about use of force and those kinds of things. It was really aligning people's skill sets with what was happening in the community. So, so I, so that is kind of at least a report on the Cahoots program. We have a lot of the information that they gave me. We have the complete um, scope of services that they have with the nonprofit agency that they contract with. We have costs on some of those kinds of things. And while some of that may be transferable, remember that Eugene, Oregon, again, is a very different area. It is not in a metropolitan area. For any of you that know that area, it's kind of a standalone community. It's quite a ways from Salem. It's quite a ways from Portland. So it's a little bit different than Imperial Beach, where we're in the middle of a major metropolitan area. And even though we're a smaller community, we have issues in our community that are a little bit more urban related than what they might find in Eugene. So those were that's some of the feedback they gave me. Now, at this point, we weren't necessarily, I hope everyone is writing down their questions so that when we get to the question and answer, you won't forget any questions you might have about this. But I would stop and ask whether or not the Mayor Pro Tem or Councilman Spriggs have any questions. And if not, we would go into some of the information I was asked to gather about the use of best practices when it comes to community policing and use of force.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I do have a question. Did they mention if there were other programs that they modeled theirs on, or was it very organic? And how was that process? Did they tell you how they developed this model?
That's a great question. So, and that's, you know, I probably didn't do a very good job of explaining it. He said the biggest thing about the Cahoots program is it was created for Eugene, Oregon. They took a look at what's happening in their community and they created a program that they thought would best serve Eugene, Oregon. And he encouraged us that if we want to do the same thing, that we want to take, and that's what I think we're doing with, I hope that's what we're doing with this ad hoc committee, is taking a look at what we would like to see for Imperial Beach and build a program that works for our community, because it's going to be different than any other. Imperial Beach is unique. It's fantastic, but it's better than any other. It's different than any other community. So we want to make sure we're building a program for our community. So I hope that answers your question, but yeah, it was specifically for Eugene.
I guess my question was more leaning towards if they involved the community, if they involved consultants, like the actual process. What did that look like? I know it was a long time ago, but I'm sure there's lessons learned somewhere in there to not reinvent the wheel. And I'm sure they modeled, probably, maybe not. Maybe they were the pioneers in this program, but just curious about the process so that we could help inform our own, even though it's a different, you know, community, different economies of scale. But, you know, there's always going to be lessons learned elsewhere that we could apply to make the process less cumbersome or difficult for us.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I don't have the answer to that specific question, but I will contact him and ask him about the origination and maybe how the program got initiated. One thing I would say, though, in answer to the second part of your statement is they are very community-minded in this. Yes, they have regular meetings. They have an oversight board for this particular program. Again, it's a university community, so they probably have a lot of dealings with the university police as well, which are a separate police force in Eugene. So yeah, absolutely. I can call and find out how the program initiated so that we have that information. That's a good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
I would just make the comment that you know, I'm a leader in the Coastal Cities group of the League of California Cities, 61 different coastal cities, 61 different challenges regarding coastal land use management, dealing with the Coastal Commission, preparing local coastal programs and all of that. And it really, really is important for us to look at these best practices, see what's adaptable to Imperial Beach, but recognizing that Imperial Beach is really unique. I'll give you just one example. Unlike Eugene, I would imagine, and this dovetails with our need for data from the sheriff as well, how many of those emergency and non-emergency calls are responses to situations involving non-residents of Imperial Beach? Because we're a visitor serving community, we have a large number of non-residents every day, especially during the high season, there's 5 or 6 months or so when the weather is hot, in our community. And we have, before we can really, I think, understand our total response to this law enforcement challenge, we need to know what portion of law enforcement resources in Imperial Beach is devoted to addressing the concerns of non-residents who have a whole different agenda than residents do. Non-residents are really coming here for one purpose, and that's to have a great time. And although we rely on them for a lot of our sales tax and other income, our community is really built for, as a beach community, built for that. So we have kind of unique needs. And so I think that's just one example of where our needs may differ and what kinds of calls, what kinds of emergency and non-emergency situations, and how much cost should Imperial Beach bear if it turns out that half of those calls are really for non-resident services. So I think we've got a lot of things to explore as a unique community here, and I'm really looking forward to seeing some of the other best practices, Andy.
Thank you, Councilman Spriggs. So I'm going to pre-warn everybody as we move through this next one. There's going to be some slides with a lot of information, but I think it's important that we keep that information together so that we can discuss it. So I wanted to talk about, I was asked to talk about really two things: best practices for community policing, and really that really comes down to definition, and that's why it becomes important. And then also some best practices for use of force. So there was a report that was created by the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights and the Leadership Conference Education Fund. And the consultants that they used to put this together, and I have the report here. It's a rather lengthy report, but just to let everybody see that, I've got a copy of the report, and if anybody wants to peruse that, we probably could make that available. But the consultants that they used to put that together were Ron Davis, who is the former director of the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, or COPS. We've all heard the COPS program for the U.S. Department of Justice. They also used Chief Thompson of the Camden County Police Department in New Jersey, and then Sue Rahr, who is the executive director of the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission. And so they tried to get, East Coast, West Coast, and some people from the federal government to put together what they believe are some of the best practices that we can use if we want to think and talk about community policing. And I found them to be interesting. Now, I know there's a lot of information on this slide, but they basically put together 12 best practices that we should be looking at if we want to have successful community policing. And I'll just go through them real quickly because at some point, this has been vetted. I think the Mayor Pro Tem mentioned earlier that you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. I think a lot of communities are looking at how can they best move into a more community policing model. And so I just wanted to throw these up here, and I thought that they were quite good suggestions. First one, support local resolutions that embrace and require community policing is a key operational philosophy. So it has to be supported by the community, must be supported by the elected officials. Commit to community policing in mission statements, strategic plans, leadership development programs. That's national talk. I would say at local talk, we'd be talking about things like local coastal programs, like our zoning ordinance, like our strategic plan. Some of those things that, community safety is all about the community, not necessarily about the law enforcement agency. And I think that again, it's a nuance, but I think that when you're talking about community policing, that's what I think that they're trying to lead toward. The third one you can see there's commit sufficient resources to implement community policing. So one of the real challenges we have, of course, in Imperial Beach is financial. So all of these things, I know that there's talk about how expensive the Sheriff's Department contract might be, but remember, it's because we're asking them to do a lot of things for the community. And for us to ask them to do fewer things, we need to make sure that there are other programs in place or other strategies in place to deal with public safety in this community, because that public safety is our number one goal. It's the most important thing to it. When we did our recent surveys, personal safety, keeping the community safe, preparing for emergencies were the highest priorities that came back in the surveys. So we know that in Imperial Beach, community safety and personal safety are the highest priorities of our residents. The next one there is embrace procedural justice as a guiding principle that informs policies, practices, and training. We've talked a lot about that, making sure that all of our residents feel like that, regardless of who you are, your status in life, your gender, your race, your religion, all those things, that there's procedural justice and everybody gets treated on a fair basis. I think the next one is really important, and I think that that's what the ad hoc committee is trying to do. We have a lot of people participating this morning on a Saturday morning, giving up a lot of their time, and that's a testament to our community. But we need to reconcile with the community. When we hear concerns and things that the community wants us to do different, we need to make sure we're always communicating with our residents. Third is give communities a direct, ongoing say in police practices. I know that this has been a real challenge for us a little bit in Imperial Beach because, again, we talked a little bit about how Imperial Beach only makes up about 2% of the population that is served by the county sheriff. County sheriff serves a little over 1 million people, and so it's really hard for a smaller community that only makes up 2% to really drive the policies of the sheriff's department. So this is one of the things that they believe are best practices, is to make sure that residents and communities have a direct ongoing say in the practices of community policing. And then we want to make sure that we develop performance measures that reflect the principles of community engagement, collaboration, problem solving, and trust building. So again, I think we want to make sure that the sheriff's department is engaged in everything that we do. We talked a little bit earlier about LCPs and zoning and development and some of those things. The more they have input in the beginning, they have a lot of good ideas about how to build things safer and for things to be safer, proper lighting, proper access, proper views into buildings, some of those kinds of things. So we want to make sure we're involving them at the very beginning. This is a really important one as well, because right now, if you talk to our officers, they go from call to call to call as quickly as they can. But we do want to give officers ample time to engage with the community members and solve community concerns. So make sure that we, again, are involving both sides here. And then building an understanding of the societal causes and consequences of social problems. Our community is changing. It changes every day. Societal issues have changed, and so we need to be aware of those. Implementing policies for encounters with people with limited English proficiency. Again, this was written nationwide, but here on the border, that's probably a big issue for us. And we have more than just English and Spanish in our community. We have a large Filipino population here. And so we want to make sure that people can, again, Erica really is trying to help me teach Spanish, right? So she teaches me these words and I try to say, I have no idea what I'm saying. They just sound like mush to me, but I really try. I'm trying really hard to be able to communicate better in Spanish. I can't imagine, though, if I was really trying to explain a situation where I was frustrated or had some anxiety and trying to do it in a different language. It must be very, very difficult. So we want to make sure that we are giving people the opportunity to express themselves in these stressful situations in the most comfortable way possible. And the use of police in schools as a solution to student discipline. I found that interesting. We are working with our school districts right now. Some of them are having some financial issues, and so we are talking about the best way to provide policing in schools. That's something that we need to take a look at. And then finally, prohibit officers from asking people about their sexual orientation or immigration status. Again, these are best practices that were identified by some researchers that were talking with various police departments and social programs throughout the country. So I just wanted to share those. I found, and I just gave the bullet points. There's a lot of reading and statistics and narrative that goes along with that. But again, I hope everyone is writing down any questions they might have about community policing. And maybe what I'll do, if you don't mind, Madam Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs, is just move straight into, because I think they're related, the use of force best practices, and then we can engage in any questions or conversations that you might have or members of the public. Well, we talked about use of force last time, and there's also been a lot of thought and ideas put into some of the best use of force practices. So one is to commit to respecting and protecting human life and ensuring safety for all. Of course, that's a very general statement. The first couple are general, and then I thought they got into some good specifics. Prohibit the use of force only when necessary to resolve conflict and protect public and officer safety. prohibit and regulate tools and tactics with a high risk of death or injury that are disproportionate to the threat. So I think that that was important, that what we want to do is make sure that the tools and tactics that are being used are proportionate to the threat that is being felt by the officers. Set clear policies applicable to all force instruments, and then followed up by set clear policies regarding specific force instruments. So again, there's some general thoughts about use of force, and then when do you use some of the specific tools? When should you use a taser? When should you be pulling a gun out of your holster? Some of those kinds of things are best use of force practices. Ensure officers consider personal characteristics before using force. Require officers to intervene in proper uses of force. This has become quite a topic, of course, with what we believe we saw. There's at least two sides to every story, but what we believe we saw in Minnesota. And I don't want to make any comments on that. I don't know enough about it, but requiring officers to intervene when they see improper uses of force. Require officers to render aid until medical assistance arrives. Provide continual scenario-based training, and then establish robust processes for reporting and investigating uses of force. Now, again, some people may ask, well, why are you going to a national book on best practices? I am not a police officer. I have not taken any police training. So what I tried to do was find a resource that I thought was balanced between both the social programs that we are experiencing in our community, as well as law enforcement. And this particular guide seemed to have a nice balance of both, and they identified some best practices. And so I just wanted to kind of maybe give an explanation of why I went to that particular source to provide this information this morning.
Andy, at some point while we're talking about use of force, I think it might be helpful if you go back to where we were 2 weeks ago and where we are today regarding progress with the sheriff in definitions of interactions that they will be collecting data on going forward that are just as germane to many people in the community as use of force, including handcuffing, curbing, and other interventions that are beyond simple questioning while somebody's in their vehicle.
Thank you, Councilman Spriggs. Yeah, since our last meeting, and I probably should have included this in the summary, and I apologize for that, but since our last meeting, we had an opportunity, we being the assistant city manager and myself, had an opportunity to meet with our consultant, who is Mike Gray, and then Commander Brown from the Sheriff's Department and our local station commander, Lieutenant Marquez, about what kind of information we could find specifically to Imperial Beach. And we talked about the definitional differences between what the sheriff might identify as official use of force and what a resident might experience and what they might consider use of force. And about 30, now probably 40 days ago, the Sheriff's Department decided to go beyond. And by the way, we really appreciate the fact that they are listening to us. This demonstrated that they are listening to this program. Mr. Brown and Lieutenant Marquez both let us know that they have been attending these meetings. They're listening. They are really trying to take this serious, and we appreciate it. They have implemented now some new statistics gathering methods for what residents might consider use of force, but that the national standard or crime reporting data does not consider use of force. For instance, they are now going to keep track of every time someone is restrained. And restraints means anytime that handcuffs are used. Right now, that is not considered use of force on a national level, but the San Diego Sheriff's Department is going to start keeping information on that. And they started about 30 days ago, which I guess I should say about 40 days ago now. And so we're going to be able to understand that data better every day as we go forward. The other thing that they are talking about is making sure that they keep track of pointing. Now, what they called pointing was any time that a taser or a gun has to be removed from its holster. Right now, use of force is when that weapon is either discharged or used. Now, at least in San Diego, where I think hopefully at least in our Sheriff's Department, they're trying to be more responsive to these community concerns. They're going to start keeping track of any time that the gun or the taser is removed from its holster. So those are really, again, I think that they are listening. I thought we had a very good meeting. Again, the assistant city manager or Mr. Gray, or even if Commander Brown or Lieutenant Marquez are on the line, they may want to augment that. But I thought it was a very productive meeting. They have been willing to open up and try and help us understand the local data. We are going to try to mine that data. We hope to have some of it today, but it's not the way they have typically kept it. Again, we're 2% of the sheriff's contract and they keep it as an agency, but we are trying to identify ways to get more community specific information, and they are on board trying to help us do that. So I hope that that's what you were trying to lead towards, Councilman Spriggs.
Yeah, yes, Andy, I thought the information that you just provided was very relevant to today's discussion and our ongoing efforts to actually acquire objective data on instances, in Imperial Beach, including breaking down what's considered emergency versus non-emergency, and what are the sheriff, and data concerning these various shades of interaction, from clear uses of force to some of these less clear instances that you just mentioned. I also think it's important for everyone who's participating in this to know that we are trying to be as transparent as humanly possible on the process that we're going through to arrive at some recommendations to the City Council, including these ongoing meetings and discussions that are taking place between these community meetings to try to get more information. So thanks, Andy.
So that is the end of my presentation. I will certainly turn some time over to the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs about how you might want to guide the community input and discussion. But I did want to go through it a little bit. So we've done this before, but this might be the first time that someone is joining one of our meetings. As the Mayor Pro Tem opens up the meeting for public, you can see for the public comment, you can see in the upper left-hand corner there, if you go under the tab that says participants, if you're on Zoom, it says participants, and then you'll see a raise your hand feature. So if you press on participants first and then raise your hand, it will notify the city clerk that you have a comment that you would like to make. If you are on the phone, that same feature is *9 on your phone, and the city clerk will be able to identify you. She will call your name and you'll be able to speak. I guess it was 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, we kept saying, if you have a question, raise your hand. I know a lot of people turned on their video and thought, and I really apologize, thought that we physically meant raise your hand. So I just want to once again reiterate, when we say raise your hand, we mean go to participants, raise your hand, and then the city clerk will be notified that you have a comment. So Madam Mayor Pro Tem, that was the end of my presentation, and we'll turn the meeting back over to you and Councilman Spriggs.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I'd like to go to comments or questions that the public may have. City Clerk Kelly, do we have any hands risen?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem. The first person we have is Lance Rogers. Mr. Rogers, please unmute yourself and begin.
Good morning. Thank you very much for putting this together. This is just really important, and I'm just really encouraged with this meeting. When I was looking at the bullet points, and it talks about giving officers time to engage with the community. When this committee is over, and there are the findings presented to council, what sorts of ways can I, as a community member, continue to engage with law enforcement? I know in other jurisdictions they've had coffee with the cops once a month. Are there other ways that I can engage directly once this committee is over?
That's a really great question, Mr. Rogers. So we have discussed the possibility of continuing this beyond the council meeting when we're going to present the recommendations, whether it's in ad hoc form that'll be determined during the council meeting. Certainly, I think that this is the foundation for something that could be ongoing. So whether it looks like this or it looks differently, whether it's a little bit more formal, like some of the boards that we have in the city, or a little bit less informal, something like a very community driven. I think that is still to be determined, but I certainly would love to see this momentum keep going and continuing this conversation, because like I mentioned in the beginning, this work won't end September 16. This is going to be ongoing, because we're going to continue to gather data and ideas and hopefully start shaping what we've been discussing and molding during these conversations during these last few weeks. So I don't know if you'd like to add anything, Councilmember Spriggs.
Yes, I think that was a great question. And I guess there are two kinds of approaches we could make to responding to that. One is the continuation of some sort of an oversight committee, subcommittee of the city council, something like what we're doing right now, or as you mentioned, Mayor Pro Tem, something formal or informal that continues as to have periodic meetings with the sheriff on reviewing data, asking questions, just providing a little bit of accountability and community involvement. On the other hand, I think what Mr. Rogers was referring to is the opportunity for informal interaction by citizens that's not necessarily part of that. And I know that Lieutenant Juan Marquez, I believe he has had at least one or two sort of coffees or informal sessions. And we very might want to recommend the continuation of that, or to sort of schedule them quarterly so that they're on the calendar. Because that, even if only 2 or 3 people show up, it shows, and he is the perfect lieutenant for this, because he likes that kind of engagement, and he's very comfortable with it, and it sets a precedent for any successors that he has coming into Imperial Beach as lieutenant, because they do rotate, to have those kinds of ongoing informal opportunities for community members to sit down and talk about whatever's on their minds. So I think both of those, the larger and the more informal with the sheriff, are good things for us to keep in mind as we move into our report. And if anyone else wants to comment on whether they like those approaches, that's fine as well. Thanks.
The next speaker is Martha Sullivan. Ms. Sullivan, please unmute yourself.
Hello,
Go
this
ahead.
is Martha. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. I actually moved to IB a little over a year ago. I purchased basically my retirement home here, coming from the city of San Diego. And this is my first meeting here. So I appreciate the opportunity. I'm particularly interested in this topic because for the last several years, I have been very involved in the city of San Diego in developing an independent commission on police practices, which just recently was put on the ballot by the San Diego City Council. So I've had a lot of community-based experience working on this issue, and I'm glad to see this discussion here in my new hometown. Along those lines, I'd like to encourage, I already see, some evidence of this, but I just want to encourage, as my first, comment in this process. I've been just so impressed in my own work with how much is present in the community in terms of experience and skills and education, that they can contribute to our local governance. So I would really encourage that we look, as we develop, going forward, this approach, that we look to make use of, our own resources and our own community members and leverage those as much as possible. It's important that our public safety framework, structure, resources really make use of our local community members and not, be perceived as just an external structure kind of imposed on the local community members. I also just wanted to ask, I don't know the answer to this myself, and maybe it's already been explored, so I apologize if it's repetitive. But I'm wondering, is it possible for the city of IB to contract with, for example, the city of San Diego for police services, or the city of Chula Vista, since they're, adjacent to our city and already have some familiarity with our needs and, unique characteristics? Because, the county sheriffs, I'm trying to think of the closest other services that they would be providing. Since the city of San Diego is to the east of us, and then you have the city of Chula Vista, and then the city of Coronado to the north. So I was just curious about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Yes, meetings. Thanks for that question, and that comment is great. As far as engaging and keeping the community involved and recommendations and approaches to public safety, I think that's really, really important, no doubt. I appreciate your participation in this group, given your experience that you bring to the table. And yes, so going back to your question, we've had that discussion, and it is a possibility, but right now what we're really focusing on is, reviewing our contract with the sheriff department and figuring out ways moving forward. So that conversation is open, and the sheriff department has been very, has been engaged with us in this discussion. So we're going to move forward in this way, but we want to, the conversation still continuing, and we want to keep our options open moving forward. I don't know if you want to add anything, Mr. Hall or Councilmember Spriggs.
I have nothing to add. I think that's some great suggestions, and Martha's observations after just 1 year here, that we've got a lot of really, really smart, experienced people in this small town of ours is absolutely true. It's one of the things that I think we all love about Imperial Beach is the wide range of experiences and expertise that's already here, and that can be, and our challenge as a city council, and that's why we have so many boards, is to try to tap into that talent for helping to oversee city and provide city services. So I think that's a great observation, and I know that Councilmember Hall, City Manager Hall has been looking at all the different options that she mentioned. So yes, that's something that is ongoing.
The next speaker is Ms. Chelsea Grace. Ms. Grace, please go ahead.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. First, I wanted to say thank you for putting this together. And I think it's really wonderful how all of you have been so great at listening to the community members. I can tell that you pay very close attention to all the comments and questions and follow up on them in the next meetings. I admire that a lot. I had a couple of comments and questions. The first question has to do with documentation. I was wondering if there's a way you could put documentation on the website where you have the recorded meetings. So for instance, the request to the sheriff's office for data and their responses where they requested additional time and also the data they provided, the current use of force policies that they have, so we could review those as compared to recommendations that have been coming up. And then, and you mentioned Councilman Spriggs, I think that they are talking about collecting different data going forward. So any documentation that shows what that data is, that would be very nice to review offline. And then my second comment and question are about stakeholders. So obvious stakeholders are the sheriffs and the sheriff's office and the folks that work in the sheriff's office. And I would really appreciate hearing from some of their representatives, along with some of their comments on these recommendations. And they have a lot of experience, and so it would be great to hear from them. Also, it would be nice to hear from some of the folks in these programs that we've talked about. So for instance, some of the CSOs that we have here or in other communities and how they've felt responding to certain situations. If they feel that they are qualified to answer some of these calls, and maybe people from either the Cahoots team, or I think it was the last call you mentioned the PERT team. And so if there's an area where they have a PERT team, getting their experience and how it was to interact with the community to start and implement those programs, I'd love to hear from other stakeholders. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Grace. These are great suggestions. I would say we can absolutely put up on the website any information that is, public. I think that's an absolute great suggestion. Maybe City Clerk Kelly, maybe we can start a shared folder and maybe keep an Excel tracking document of what we've requested and then check if yes, no, pending, whatnot. That would be helpful. In addition to some of the other policies that you're mentioning that if they are public, we should have them available on our website. I think that that's a great idea to bring on board perhaps folks that have participated in these alternative programs or in these like PERT programs. I think that would be great to have hear from them firsthand. And I also think that we can definitely talk to Lieutenant Marcus and his team and see if they're amenable to the idea of having a conversation and hearing feedback from them on some of these ideas and recommendations that have come forward. Like I said, this is going to be ongoing, and that is the hope that we continue to build that bridge and strengthen it really. And I think I hope I answered all the questions, but yes, I believe so. But
Mayor Pro Tem McGarry, this is City Clerk Kelly. We can certainly post published documents onto our website, as well as provide links to the Sheriff's Department information.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Can we move to the next speaker, Madam Pro Tem?
Yes, please.
The next speaker is Peter Lazis. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Andy, first of all, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it, learned a lot about Cahoots. Haven't heard about it before. I think it is the foundation of where we can start to build our own solution, which I think will ultimately end up looking a lot like Cahoots. A few observations when I was listening to your presentation was, one is that, as you noted, Eugene's a different city, sort of self-contained than IB, San Diego County, and this requires a lot of interaction with the sheriffs, which we have 11 sheriffs and there's probably 1,000 in the county. So, we gotta be sure that all the sheriffs who might respond to IB are aware of how you deal with a Cahoots type of environment. The other thing on your excellent list about the expectations of the police department and how we expect them to behave would be, we should start to add in, I think, a certain, what I call the golden rule element of, policing and community involvement, that the police have an expectation, a higher bar than the public to behave in a way that's, respectful and not immediately condescending toward the people they interact with. But on the other hand, the public has an expectation that they should be respectful to the police and not immediately react to any police involvement with this sort of in-your-face resistance movement, which when you see a lot of times these poor outcomes of the police, both sides really went to the I'm mad mode far quicker than was probably necessary. So I think part of our expectations as we talk about how people should behave on the police side, we should also start talking about, hey, when you're a member of the public, you should behave in a way which is the golden rule, and you should treat police officers with respect, and probably you'll get treated a lot differently in return. Not to excuse what they overuses would be, but nevertheless, we should sort of have that as part of the response as well, because too often times people almost view police resistance as some kind of a noble outcome into of itself. And finally, I'm really encouraged again by Cahoots, because right now the sheriff's department is like a sharp knife in your toolbox. It's very good at certain selected tasks, but when you have tasks which don't apply to that sharp knife, well, guess what? You're getting a sharp knife anyway. That's why I'm so encouraged by the Cahoots program, which gives the community another method to respond to, I think, calls which are more suited towards that type of response. We should also look at, Andy, the leveraging our lifeguards, which I think is unique in this community, that might be either part of a foundation of a Cahoots type environment, or at least an augment to the Cahoots type environment. And again, thank you so much for this meeting. It's really a great opportunity to get the community involved.
The next speaker is Marcus Boyd. Please unmute yourself, Mr. Boyd.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. I appreciate the.
Mr. Boyd?
Yes.
Okay. Can you speak up a little?
Hi, can you not hear me? Hold on a second. I apologize. I connected through mobile. Can you hear me now?
Yes. No. Mr. Boyd?
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. I apologize. I appreciate the update regarding the information coming from the sheriff. However, there's some minor information or easily obtained information that we discussed, I think, last time, and that is the database from which the press log comes from. If we could have just the data output of what would be the weekly press log, say for the last year or two, that would be a fair amount of information to consider, considering there is no other data directly related to Imperial Beach that's being provided by the sheriffs, although it's been requested, weeks ago, a month plus ago. I'd also like to make sure that the sheriff, I'm glad that possibly Lieutenant Marquez is on the line, is aware that there has been a hostility with regard to the sheriffs seeing citizens film them. They get defensive and sometimes even threatening. And so I wonder if that has been discussed with the city too, and in regard to, it's not the use of force at that point. Well, it is a use of force. It's a use of intimidation, which is indeed force. So we need to discuss how citizens are treated when they are witnessing police. And I understand police would like respect. Citizens are far more respectful when they see a camera on them, I think, because they feel like they are at least being protected from the possibility of inappropriate interaction with police. So if we could discuss that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, I think that's coming from Marcus's side of the microphone.
Yes, if you could just mute me, that'd be great.
Jackie, could you mute him? Okay. Thank you.
I think those were some useful suggestions that we should make. And we're recording all of this. I'm certainly taking notes, and I know this session is recorded. But the observation about sheriff response, deputies' response to being filmed is, I think, suggests that maybe this is an area for training for deputies, because they are in the public eye. more nowadays in recent years than ever before. I would think that it's very difficult if any of us are going about our jobs and somebody starts filming what we're doing with their cell phone. The natural human reaction is to not necessarily like that. It's the natural human reaction is that that's kind of an invasion of of our space. But for public servants and particularly law enforcement, public safety personnel, this is kind of the norm nowadays, and their training should include tolerance for that, and even taking them through scenarios where they, in their practice sessions, somebody, a civilian, is filming them, getting them used to the idea, because it's not good practice to react negatively towards citizens who are filming them, especially nowadays in light of everything that's been going on with interactions between law enforcement and the public.
Okay.
So I think maybe we should think about whether we want to discuss this further within the smaller committee in terms of recommendations for to the sheriff, or things to discuss with our lieutenant and maybe Sheriff Gore about training. We probably also need to corroborate and see if there is further support for the idea that sheriffs are not responding neutrally to being filmed, and if that is fairly widespread, then it's even more clear that we should be including some suggestions for further training, so that doesn't that those negative reactions don't spill over to create a greater divide between the public and sheriffs and that which already exists. I think one of the outcomes we want here from our report is an improved environment for policing in Imperial Beach, both on the part of the citizens and the part of the sheriffs. We want our community to feel safer. We want it to be have less crime, and we want, and therefore, a better working relationship between deputies and the public is essential. So we may be making other recommendations regarding putting deputies on bikes and having them walk the beats and be more accessible. I think there are a lot of things that go with the idea of enhancing the sense of collaboration and cooperation between deputies and the community. And certainly the way they respond if they're being filmed is a part of that improved environment. So thanks for that comment, Marcus.
Yeah, Councilman Spriggs, I think the only thing I would add to that is, first, I recognize not everyone in the community is as attractive as me and probably gets a little camera shy, but being as attractive as I am, I hog the camera every chance I get. So, but we have had that discussion a little bit with Lieutenant Marquez, frankly, and I would implore our residents that while they're filming, make sure that they do understand that the sheriffs have a job to do. So a camera too close to the face when they are trying to do some of that work can be distracting. So we don't want more distractions at a time when typically this is an emergency situation. So absolutely, I think filming should be allowed. I just would implore residents to make sure that filming doesn't interfere with the work that the officers need to complete. And I'm sure that that's inherent, but I thought I would just mention.
Okay, the next speaker is Stephen Futterman. Please unmute yourself, Mr. Futterman.
Thank you.
Go
Can you
ahead.
hear me? Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for putting this together. I really appreciate it. I did have a question. I think this is for Andy Hall. And this is about, I just want to, I think I might have had one understanding about how our security services are funded. So is this funded through the Port of San Diego, or the way our contractual agreement, where the money actually comes from, or is this funded through the general fund? And additionally, if in that contract, whenever we have a situation that's a bit larger than our initial contract could handle, in other words, if we have 2 officers that have to respond, but the situation means that other officers have to come and assist. Do we have to pay overtime, and does that change any of the conditions of the contract? Thank you.
Thank you. Those are really great questions. I'll try to answer them best I can. So the funding that we get from the Port of San Diego actually is a general fund revenue. So the entire sheriff's contract is paid out of the general fund, but some of that general fund revenue does come from the port. At last told, about 25% of our fire department's budget, just roughly, would be covered from the revenue that we get from the Port of San Diego, and then 75% would be from the city's pure general fund. In terms of mutual aid, if it is an emergency situation and we need more officers, our station covers both the city of Imperial Beach and the unincorporated area of Bonita. So if there are officers in the Bonita area and we're having a situation, they will also come here and respond to in a situation in Imperial Beach. But again, if it's an emergency situation and we need SWAT or we need support from the city of San Diego or the city of Coronado, we don't usually get charged for that. When we get charged extra outside of our contract is, for instance, when we have larger events in the community, like say, a parade or the Sandcastles event or the marathons or some of those kinds of things. And so lots of times it is the event organizers that pay those sheriff's costs, but that's usually when we go outside of our contract. The day-to-day emergency services and the support that we get from the county in terms of, the helicopters or SWAT or hazmat or some of those things, that's included in our contract. So I hope I answered your question. I know it's a very complex question. If you would like more detailed information on that, love to talk to you. Feel free to send me an email, ahall@imperialbeachca.gov, and I can give you probably more detailed information about exactly how the budget items work. The assistant city manager is with us today as well. If she has any comments, she can, but I think I covered it.
Thank you. It was very helpful. Appreciate it.
The next speaker is Peter Smith. Please unmute yourself, Mr. Smith. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. My appreciation again for you holding this meeting this morning. Andy, that was really a fascinating brief on cahoots. I had not heard of the program. Now that I've learned a little bit about it, I'll research it further myself. I regrettably missed a little bit of your presentation, so if I'm asking about something you already explained, I apologize for that. But one thing I'm curious about is the cahoots program restricted solely to people who are going to be cooperative subjects? Because I'm thinking of, from an IB perspective, if there's an individual who's using the beach or a parking lot as a campground, and they're not interested in getting any social help, they're not interested in relocating, and in particular, they're not interested in cooperating with somebody who shows up from a cahoots type organization rather than a law enforcement officer. How does that work up there in Eugene?
So again, the biggest difference between something that we would be starting with in Eugene is that they've been doing it since 1989. So they got 30 years under their belt. But yeah, in at least Eugene, the way the program works there, the cahoots program is not dispatched to any type of emergency situation. They do not carry weapons. When they approach a situation and they feel unsafe, they immediately contact the Eugene Police Department and they take complete operational control. So the cahoots program works for the police. They're not an equal partner. They work for the police and they help them with the non-emergency issues. If they feel like it's over their head, Eugene, they assume complete operational control.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Mitchell McKay. Please go ahead, Mr. McKay.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. I also wanted to kind of jump on everybody else's comments and thank Andy and City Council for putting this ad hoc community group workshop together. I did want to touch on one point, sort of a housekeeping point. I noticed that one of the District 4 candidates is using his campaign sign as his logon or his screenshot, I would request that that type of activity be restricted from these types of meetings. This isn't a political discussion. Our elections are supposed to be nonpartisan. So again, I would request that that individual remove his campaign sign immediately, and in the future use either a photograph or some other icon that represents his presence. Thank you.
Do we have a reply, Andy or Jackie especially, who's the keeper of the books on appropriate campaign behavior?
Yeah, Councilman Spriggs, I'll let Jackie respond. I got to be honest, I hope people know I don't see the screen like you guys do. I only see the presentation, so that's why my eyes wander around a little bit. I don't get to see all you like you get to see each other, so I apologize. But I'll let Jackie respond. I don't know the campaign laws as well as she does, as you say.
Yes, Councilmember Spriggs, same for myself. I am looking at the panelist and participant screen, not the video and photo screen. So I apologize for not catching that. Mr. McKay is correct. He should not be campaigning during this meeting. I believe he removed his picture. And thank you for pointing that out to us. The next speaker is Ms. Libby Urimovic. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Hello, good morning. Are you guys ready? I also am very happy. I know you're shocked, but this is a good way to go. You know, a few days ago, there was a YouTube video of a guy stealing a bottle of wine out of the 7-Eleven, and the community followed him and recorded him until the cops showed up. We do have a very strong community, and I think we could pay people. We have a lot of retired people. We have a lot of stay-at-home moms. We have people that could help out in the community, and we have an advantage that we're very locked in. We don't have a lot of roads coming in and out. I think signs and cameras. And if we could develop a reputation. Don't come here to start trouble because we will hunt you down. And start advertising this, we will eliminate a demographic that comes just to, you know, have something to do. And that's people come off the highway and they're looking for something to do. If they know, don't come into Imperial Beach, we're looking at you, we're watching you, we will hunt you down, they will stop coming here. And if we can advertise, we have a safe community, safe and dog friendly. It is too very beneficial. And we have a beach, of course. So yeah, I like the ideal of a community watch, a community committee, and keeping that money in the community. And please do not just disregard hooking up with Coronado. Coronado police already patrol to the Keys. It would not be that much money to come in and patrol in Imperial Beach and respond to Imperial Beach. And you know, the thing is, the sheriff brought this on themselves. We don't blame the line workers. Those kids are just trying to do their jobs. But Gore went predatory, and we've all seen it. And it's expensive, and we need to find other ways. And I also would like to see a call log. I cannot get a call log to see how many calls they respond to for that $500,000 a month check in January. Thank you.
The next speaker is Danielle Richardson. Please unmute yourself. Danielle Richardson. Okay, let's move on to the next person. We can go back to Danielle. The next person is Julie Behrens. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Are you speaking for Julie Behrens?
I am. I'm sorry. This is Andrew Behrens, her husband. We're just both listening on the same device. But
okay, great.
I just want to say thank you for the opportunity that you guys are giving us to come together and speak about this. But I can't help but feel like regardless of what comes out of these meetings, we're planning to remove a sheriff's deputy due to money reasons and then other reasons. So with that being said, I know you brought up the Eugene project, but what is the implementation process for removing an officer and replacing them with whatever program we decide? Because I feel like the timing of this is, are we removing an officer and then deciding what we're going to do with replacing that void that needs to be filled? Or are we going to experiment with a new project while still maintaining that officer? And then from there, if that project or that process is effective, we then decide to remove that officer. That's my question. Thank you.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, maybe I can answer that. So we've been working with the Sheriff's Department, and they have minimum staffing standards. We're trying to understand those. And so, no, I don't think that there's any intention to just arbitrarily remove officers before we have replacement programs in place, and even maybe then thereafter. I think one of the things that we all want to communicate in our city, and it goes well beyond law enforcement, Imperial Beach for a long time has had to basically use the word or a lot. We're going to do this or that, or we're going to fund this or that. Hopefully in the future, as our community becomes more financially stable, we can change or to and we should probably start talking about doing this and that. Now, I know one of the things that was very clear to me when they talked about, when I had a chance to talk to the lieutenant who runs the Cahoots program in Eugene, this was to augment law enforcement and to make it more effective, not necessarily to cut it back. It was to make it so that, again, the right personnel were responding to the right kind of situations in the community, rather than having sworn officers go to situations where sworn officers may not be the best fit for the situation. So no, I really appreciate the question. I think that at least my experience with the ad hoc committee is, and I believe this is true, I don't think that there is a predetermined outcome. I think listening to the community is sincere. I hope it is. I've learned so much from the community just in the few meetings that we've had. So anyway, I just wanted to get my 2 cents in before turning over to the Mayor Pro Tem, and Councilor Spriggs may also have comments on this.
I mean, at some point, Mr. Hall, it's still yet to be determined. That's why we're having these series of meetings. We're going to look at all the different options, financially, programmatically, and come up with some, hopefully, recommendations, not just by our next September 16th council, but moving forward and determining what is best for our community. So that's why we have this process. We don't know all the answers at this point.
I don't really have much to add to that, other than we've been looking at the rising cost of the sheriff contract for years now. I've been on the council 10 years. This has been something that almost every one of those years it's been a challenge, because our green line of revenue isn't rising as fast as the red line of expenditures, and the red line is driven largely by the sheriff's contract. So we've got a moment of reckoning that's finally hit this year, and we were going to look at the sheriff's contract anyway. Now the first the first presentation 4 weeks ago looked at the city budget comprehensively and addressed this issue. The second presentation 2 weeks ago looked at the sheriff's contract and staffing. And we saw that there are somewhere around 26 FTEs, or full-time sheriff's deputies, assigned in one manner or another to Imperial Beach, plus overhead. And if we do anything, and Mayor Pro Tem is right, we're still looking at what our options are, what can we do. I can guarantee you that there is not a single vote on the city council for reducing the effectiveness of the anti-crime efforts in Imperial Beach, or boots on the ground, so to speak. There may be other options to save money without reducing boots on the ground law enforcement in Imperial Beach. And believe me, those are the options we're going to be looking at, if any, in this respect. So I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
We'll try Danielle Richardson again.
Hello.
Danielle,
Okay.
okay, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry about that. I panicked. I couldn't use my computer to unmute myself. But my comment is actually just what we were talking about, boots on the ground. I didn't have access to the call logs. And that is kind of my question for Imperial Beach. Do we need more boots on the ground? Do we need less? Will it be a dangerous situation if we do decrease the boots on the ground? Not saying that we will, but anyway, for the past 2 weeks, I just did my own personal MIDI informal audit, and I kind of stopped and pulled over or followed the police or the sheriffs when they were responding to calls. And I did find that every time it seemed like they had ample amount of sheriffs responding to all the encounters that I witnessed. I saw a bar fight that had 4 sheriffs and 4 cars respond. I saw another verbal argument with 4 sheriffs respond. A different verbal argument with 3 sheriffs there. I saw 5 sheriffs respond to our disagreement about erasing Black Lives Matter chalk at the pier. And I saw a simple traffic stop for a ticket, traffic violation, and they had to have 2 sheriffs respond to that, which I thought was kind of excessive. I've never had 2 sheriffs need to, I've never been stopped and need to have 2 sheriffs just for a traffic violation. So that's all. I just want to say there's still a little bit of concern in the community that there are only 2 sheriffs out there to respond when we are in need, but that's definitely not true. I can see that they show up in number when need be, and my idea and statement to the council is you have to make recommendations in September, and that's coming right up, and we're not going to have a lot of answers by then. But I feel confident that you actually could reduce the budget right away while you are continuing to explore these other community ideas. And I don't think it's going to pose a significant threat to safety in our community. That's all.
The next speaker is Paul Lasso. Please unmute yourself and begin. Mr. Lasso?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. I do kind of want to address a couple of things that other participants have stated that are just, I think, kind of myths. The first is that one person was kind of equating the level of behavior, the kind of behavior that we should expect from both police and the general public, which I don't quite agree with, because police are given a tremendous amount of power over regular citizens. And if we're going to entrust that amount of power to anybody, then we really do have to hold them to a higher standard than we would the general public. We've seen a lot of video evidence of citizens acting like normal human beings, even being respectful to police, and that still doesn't protect them from excessive uses of force. I used to be a public school teacher in low-income communities in various parts of the whole country on both coasts, and I can tell you that I've had textbooks thrown at me. I've been almost hit with a chair. I've been cussed at 7:30 in the morning. And if these are all situations, then yeah, I was a school teacher, but it was in secondary school, and some of those kids were bigger than me. And if I had ever responded in the way that I've seen police officers respond to slight disrespect, then I would have lost my job. And I actually saw that happen with some of my coworkers. So to say that regular adults who are citizens should behave as respectfully as police, I don't think is a valid argument. If we're going to entrust people with that much power over the general citizenship, over general citizens, then we do need to expect that they are going to behave and act accordingly. That's the one thing. The second thing is I heard somebody mention or allude to people choosing to remain homeless or unsheltered, which is, it's a myth really, because there are so many barriers to getting shelter, to getting into a home once you're out on the street. And just the number of hurdles and the amount of shame that one has to experience just to get into a home can be really frustrating and maddening, and it can feel dehumanizing to the point where people do kind of give up and think that it's much easier to just be out on the street. Until we have housing first policies, until we can really provide services for those people, then we need to stop assuming that people are out on the street because they choose to be. There are lots of barriers that the general public doesn't really understand unless you've actually been in that situation. And kind of on that same topic is with respect to how police are interacting with the unsheltered, with how police are interacting with folks with mental illness. Last week, Dr. Clark had brought up issues with the county's PERT program, and she was alluding to that sometimes when there's a call in an area, PERT will refuse to go because they don't feel like they're safe to be there, which I think is unacceptable from county services. To me, that speaks to a lack of familiarity with any given neighborhood. You can't have a neighborhood in which people live, and then you have services that are supposed to go to that neighborhood, and the service providers are saying it's not safe. That's not a valid argument, because if people live there, then it is safe enough for people to exist there. I think it shows that we need to have people who are on the hyper-local level and who have experience in the community and who know the populations that need to be served in order to do so. And on that same note, we were speaking with an individual the other day who actually does homeless outreach. They've done homeless outreach here in IB. They work here in IB, and unfortunately they couldn't be on the call this morning. But they've also worked in Chula Vista, they've worked in South San Diego, and they've worked with law enforcement who are, kind of in conjunction with some of these services, and they have experience with the kinds of practices that are effective versus not effective. And this is the IB Community Center, who is providing these homeless services, and they're gonna they do events from time to time. And what this person was saying was that when they tried to go for ride-alongs here in IB with our sheriffs, they were stonewalled and they were prevented from going out. So even though this person does outreach in other places, and they're able to see the kind of interactions that law enforcement is having with the unsheltered community, they can't even gather that data here in IB for what is their estimate, fewer than 20 people-ish who are consistently unsheltered. And that, I think, is a really low-hanging fruit that can be changed and might help alleviate the exact kind of problem that Dr. Clark was talking about last week, is community centers that are here on that hyper-local level.
Mr. Lazo?
Yes?
Can you please sum up, please? We have a 3-minute limitation.
My apologies. The last question that I want to know is, what county services will we be looking to expand here in IB? How can they be partnered with local services? And I know that the county is doing a lot right now to expand those social services. Thank you.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, for me, Mr. Lasso was breaking up a little bit, but I think the last question was something about the county services and what they're doing to expand them. I know that we have had some communication with the county, and while they are looking perhaps to expand services here in the county as well as in the South Bay, it will take a little bit. It will take some time to ramp those up. But again, I apologize if I didn't hear that question correctly.
The next speaker is Mara Klink. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for hosting this. I really appreciate it, like everyone else. I'd like to echo the previous request for additional statistics on funding and the sheriff's responses. I appreciate that you'll make that available. In your discussion about community policing, you talked about some of the best practices from that lens, including assessment measures, including community engagement, level of trust, and so forth. And I think we've heard some of that echoed here with the comments. I'm not sure that those effectively would address my personal concerns, which come from my daily observations of what I would call, I guess, disruptive behavior at a minimum, at least on my street. And it's been interesting to hear these comments on the sheriffs because I've observed what I would consider a basic lack of patrolling and sheriff presence compared to other places I've resided. And I had always assumed that additional presence would deter some of the issues I see. And that's just my own personal viewpoint. But as you move forward and looking at the issue, I would request that you provide the type of information and measures that you're going to look at as you conduct this analysis, in addition to the statistics that I think you're going to post. I'd really appreciate that opportunity to review that as a community member. And I really look forward to being part of this conversation moving forward. That is all.
The next speaker is Mark Williams. Please begin.
Good morning. Thank you for having this. Now, on the surface, I'm opposed to anything that has fewer San Diego sheriffs who patrol our streets. It does not make sense. I feel the lower crime levels that we talk about are really up and not as safe as we were several years ago. Despite the numbers, I suggest otherwise. I feel we are being misled by the reduction of what crimes are in terms of felonies today versus what they were, meaning we changed what we call crimes and how we address them. I don't think they really got reduced. Nevertheless, I agree we do not always need a member of the sheriff's department for every call. Imperial Beach has its own public safety department where medical responses are funneled through. We have an existing infrastructure and labor force that can be tasked with 911 calls that are for excessive noise, domestic disturbances, and other responses does not necessarily require law enforcement response. This becomes additional skill our paramedics would have. They would roll from our existing fire station in a city-owned car without red lights and siren and without a fire engine or sheriff's dispatch. When on site, if this person feels or is threatened, or if a weapon is involved, they immediately leave and refer to the call of the sheriff's department. This person would also be deputized to make arrests but not carry a weapon. There's a legal reason for that. The city would have to identify the training, much like in Washington or Oregon, and for de-escalation and other identified training and what skills this person must have and how and where they get this training. This does not take a PhD or somebody who has a formal degree in mental health to deal with most people, just patients. The cost of this method would be significantly less than anything else, and the kinks could be worked out, and I suggest we seek some grant money on this. Now, the second part of this is use of force. We had that earlier conversation. Imperial Beach contracts with the Sheriff for Public Protection. We should not pretend or even discuss the use of force policies that are exclusive to Imperial Beach. We should publish or provide a link to what the Sheriff's policies are, and to that end, clear and transparent. Any policies implemented should apply equally across the entire San Diego County, and in all San Diego cities should be the same. Asking deputies to behave differently is confusing, unreasonable, and unrealistic, and maybe even dangerous. My preference would be to have universal statewide policies and wishfully nationwide policies. State leadership and Congress would have to act. Until then, it's best to let the sheriff and county supervisors decide with our input. We do not need the confusion, same as county health with the virus. Let's leave it to the experts. Thank you.
The next speaker is Gary Brown. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Thank you. My overall reaction is, a whole bunch of hurrahs for all of you. I think you're really on the right path. First of all, the Mayor Pro Tem emphasizing that the report that comes out in September will just be a first step among many steps as an ongoing process. I had been afraid that the September report would be the end of the line. or the end of the process. Secondly, I sincerely applaud and hope that the Sheriff's Department will continue to be involved and that the Sheriff's Department will have a chance to comment upon the draft report before it's finalized. I was just wondering, a question on, have you analyzed how the sheriff's existing use of force policies and practices compare to those that the city manager researched? And related to community policing, I'm wondering how the current policies about asking about sexual orientation and immigration status compare. Another point is I too, like Mr. Williams, would hope that there could be uniform standards for a deputy to operate. But I think Imperial Beach is the only city that's taking the careful view and studying the situation. And my hope is what comes out of IB may lead to adoption of sheriff's policies that they would want to enforce and have uniformly. Well, another point is I'd like to suggest that the city post and make, spread the word as much as possible to our local citizenry about the availability of the San Diego County Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board, because that body can review and make recommendations to the sheriff about any complaint that people have about sheriff deputy actions, parole actions, and things that people think are going wrong in the prison. So Ms. Kelly could have a link to CLERB's website. In terms of procedure on these meetings,
Sorry, Gary.
Oh, yeah, okay, just one
Your,
more
your
then.
time is up. Okay, sum up,
Could you,
please.
I applaud your elimination of the chat on these meetings because I was too stupid and slow thinking to follow chat and all that was being said. But hooray for all of you. I really think you've done a tremendous job so far. Thank you. Bye.
The next speaker is Pat Flowers. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Hello. Thank you for this opportunity for the community. My question is about mental health services and what is being planned or what has been done or is in the process of being planned. And how does that fit in with the county services? And how long will it take for the county to expand to way down here in Imperial Beach? It seems like we're always thought of last. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate your comments. I wanted to let everyone know this is a good time to do that, the county does provide mental health services to our community through the South Bay Community Services. So if you are aware of, or if someone needs to contact or needs some assistance with mental health issues, I would encourage you to contact the South Bay Community Services, which is a county program, and they have it throughout the county, but the one here in Chula Vista, which serves the South County, is South Bay Community Services. Clearly, as our community changes, that program probably needs to be expanded. And so I know that
Yes.
the county is looking at expanding that program because there are so many unmet needs as we see with the homeless and other people in the community. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to bring that up. And we are constantly talking to the county about that. The other thing that was brought up earlier is the Psychological Emergency Response Team, which PERT, you've heard that acronym this morning. We do have access to PERT. They do ride along with our officers on a fairly regular basis. So we do have that service here in our community as well. So thank you for those questions. Do they need to be expanded? Absolutely. And we will continue to work with the county on trying to expand those mental health programs in our community. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Mike Adams. Please unmute yourself and begin. Mr. Adams?
Yeah, I'm here. Okay. Instead of defunding law enforcement services to appease the far left crowd or the Marxist organization, the BLM, let's take a look at the salaries across the board. If we need to tighten our belt, let's do it equitably. From what I see, Imperial Beach has some handsome salaries that I am envious of. And I consider myself successful, and I am quite happy with my station in life. First off, let's break it down. Elected leaders in IB are paid a pittance, in my opinion, but who's to say they aren't funded in other ways for pushing the woke agenda of the far left? I mean, Soros' footprint, his money, is already on San Diego. Let's look at the dollars that our civil servants make in total pay and benefits as of 2018. This is the latest data. City manager, $340,000 a year in pay and benefits. Assistant city manager, $270,000 a year. Fire chief, $238,000 a year. Public works director, $223,000 a year. Marine safety chief, $195,000 a year. Fire captain / paramedic, $195,000 a year. City clerk, $195,000 a year. Deputy city manager, $194,000 a year. Fire captain, $180,000 a year. Fire captain / paramedic, $172,000 a year. Fire engineer paramedic, $172,000 a year. Assistant director of community development, $170,000 a year. I won't go on and on and on, but this is a long list. All this data can be found on transparentcalifornia.com. And another thing I want to point out in how we spend our money, on that survey that's on the Imperial Beach website, how much was paid for that survey? With all the employees on your staff, can't you conduct your own survey instead of contracting out and possible cronyism? This seems wasteful of taxpayers' hard-earned money. And I'm sure there's plenty of other examples that could be found, that could be looked at, and we could tighten our belt up a little bit. But defunding our police department, our sheriff's department, is not the answer. Thank you.
The next speaker is William Harris. Mr. Harris, please unmute yourself and begin.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my goodness there, Mr. Adams, you're right up my alley. And I think there's a lot of people in IB that really would like to see our police have the wherewithal to continue their course of protecting us and serving us. But that's not why I originally got on here. The folks that they have some folks have some comments about people getting out and filming, which I support. It's you're allowed to film things, but sometimes people that start filming think they have a press hat on, and they start getting in the faces of the sheriffs, and then the sheriffs end up having to address that issue as opposed to addressing the crime or the potential crime that they're responding to. And so to really even chastise the police for that is, they have to keep law and order in their own confines, much less of the entire city when they're doing something. And also, this is just a side note, and if it's inappropriate to ask here, you can tell me, Mr. Hall. A couple, maybe 4 weeks ago, I was on some kind of forum here where you were addressing the citizenry of Imperial Beach, and you mentioned that the Donnock Street closure was going to end in about 2 weeks, and that was, I say that was a month ago. And I've tried to email you, but I've gotten a response. If you could maybe, you don't have to answer it here, but if you find it appropriate to answer me on why this is still continuing, I don't see any reason for it. And you addressed, it's on record, you addressed several reasons why it's really not needed anymore, because the original presumptions was that people were bypassing, coming down the Strand and bypassing the Palm Avenue because of the construction there. And you mentioned that now that's not the case. It's they found out that most of the traffic that was now diverted is Imperial Beach traffic, citizen traffic here. And I think that's, let me make sure that's all I had. Anyways, I hope everyone agrees to support our officers. The reason for not asking people their immigration status has kind of been politicized. A lot of places that are sanctuary cities, which our mayor tried to do quite a while back with a proclamation that was resoundingly defeated. But anyways, I don't really want to politicize that issue. There's reasons not to give someone's immigration status. Like if you just stop them and they're not doing much wrong, maybe they get a ticket or something, that's fine. But people that are committing serious crimes or accused of committing serious crimes, that needs to be shared, because we got human trafficking going on, especially women who human trafficking, and to not share this information with Border Patrol, who we are arresting, or immigration and period, is just doesn't seem to be sound sound logic. With that, I'll end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I just wanted to let you know that I will check my junk folder or something, because I think I have responded to all my emails, and so it must have fallen in there. I will make sure to get back to you. I apologize for that. And like you say, just to not get us off base, I will respond to you offline about the Donnock. Thank you. Sorry about that.
All right. No, thank you very much.
The next speaker is a caller. Please unmute yourself, caller, and begin.
Hello?
Is that Mr. Carey?
Yeah, that's me.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you. First of all, I like a lot of other people, want to thank the staff and the subcommittee for doing a great job with this. This is one of the best. I've been here a long, long time. And it's one of the best handled communications and dealing with the community issue that I've seen in that long period of time. So I just want to thank you all for doing this and encourage you to keep at it. One of the issues that I brought up a couple of meetings ago and was concerned about had to do with the issue of the consultants, the hiring of consultants, and the role of the consultants. So I'd like to ask a couple of questions about that. You've hired the consultants, and I think the last time we met, the city manager said that you were going to review the contracts, or they were going to be taken to the council, and then some more information on those contracts where it's going to be available to us. So I'd like to know if there's any kind of update on that. There are two consultants, and I would like you to maybe say a couple of things about their roles and how you see them and why they were chosen to do those roles, and then what they've been doing so far. What I noticed that neither of them have spoken today. So what have the consultants been doing, Dr. Clark and Mr. Gray? What have they been doing? What have they been doing, and all of that? And then specifically with Dr. Clark, and you started to talk Andy, about the role of the county and all that. She works with the county and has a lot of connections, and part of my understanding of why she was brought in is she has familiarity with programs and how to create them and how to develop them. So either from you or from her, I'd like to know a little bit about what's, you know, I mean, I really like the presentation of the program in Eugene, but I'd like to see what moves we're starting to make in terms of developing our own programs and resources. We're starting to, I know South Bay, I was on the board of South Bay, so I know that they're a very good organization to bring in, and I know they're connected with the county, but just like to hear what progress we're making in that direction. You started to talk about that, I think, a few minutes ago. Okay, so anyway, it's mostly concerned with the consultants that, and again, thank you all very much. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. I'll answer that in a real quick manner, and then maybe I can even follow up with you afterwards. So as you know, the consultants bring a different set of skills. Both of them bring a different set of skills that are going to help us put this together. I mentioned that we had a chance to meet with the commander of the patrol commander of the San Diego Sheriff's Department, as well as our local Lieutenant Marquez last week. And Mr. Gray was on that call. His experience with being a retired police officer, as well as his experience in being the local government training agency, which trains a lot of our local officers in terms of use of force and all those other trainings that they go through their post certification. He was very helpful in that call, knew the right questions to ask. We will also be using, as you know, Dr. Clark. Dr. Clark is going to be really important as we put the report together, as much as anything being the review of all of that information to make sure that it's consistent with not only her experience as an expert in inclusion, but also we want for her to share her personal experiences and give us a summary up front about what we believe the findings of this report mean to Imperial Beach and what we can do moving forward. So again, those are just, so maybe just to break it down, I think Mr. Gray is more helping us collect the data, put it together, synthesize it, and understand what it means. And then Dr. Clark is helping us prepare the report, the narrative, and what it means for Imperial Beach going forward. So, and that's a little bit general, but to be more specific might take a little bit more time, and I can talk to you offline. One other thing I did want to point out, and I think that it's a couple of callers ago, and I think that that's a fair thing to talk about. So a few meetings ago, we talked about the cost of a deputy in Imperial Beach, and the cost of a deputy being around $200,000, and a detective being a little over $200,000, and the sergeant being $250,000. I just want to make clear, those are not their salaries. There's a lot that goes into a fully burdened rate. A lot of that is salaries. It can be benefits. It can be retirement. It can be other expenses. It can be equipment, office space. So I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression that the sheriff officers in Imperial Beach are making $200,000 a year. They're not. That's a fully burdened rate, and that includes a lot of things. And not defending mine, the city pays me too much. I understand that. I'm an overpaid employee. But I will say that the other employees in this city don't want anyone to walk away from this with the impression that that's their salaries. That's not. There's a lot that goes into the information that was said a little while ago. So just want to make sure that people understand that our deputies don't make those kind of salaries, but there are a lot of expenses that go into law enforcement.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I have a quick announcement.
Andy, this is Ed Spriggs. Sorry. I think it would be useful for you or Erica, if you're on the phone, to explain the components of city, not city salaries, but the cost of city employees. The fact that we have probably the second lowest salaries of city employees in the county, maybe the third lowest in the county. And because I think there was some information put out that needs to be put into the context Also, there were suggestions that we have surplus staff that could be employed to do a number of things. And in prior presentations, including our very first presentation, I don't know if everyone who's in the audience or participating in this call was participating in that first call, but City Manager Hall reviewed city staffing and city staffing costs relative to other costs, and relative to the our city staff per capita in Imperial Beach is far lower than any other city in the county. And our cost per employee is lower. So we are really, I think, way more efficient than many other cities, particularly the beach cities, which are our main comparison cities. And I just think a little bit more discussion of that, Andy, to counter the impression that we've got surplus staff, we're overpaying people, etc., is worth it at this point. You explained it about the sheriffs, but I'm not so sure that when it came to city staff, it was explained. And it's not salaries, it's cost per employee, because that's what includes health benefits, required retirement payments per CalPERS, and other sort of essential costs that go along with having a municipal staff.
As I stated, it was benefits and salary.
So Councilman Spriggs, thank you for that. Yeah, one of the things I will say is I'll touch on it real quickly, but then we certainly want to stay on focus. Yeah, I think the gentleman made it very clear that he was including the total burden cost of our city employees, not the salaries. And I think that everyone understands that Imperial Beach right now is the second lowest paying municipality in the county. Lemon Grove does have lower salaries than Imperial Beach, but essentially we're the second lowest paid, and that's understandable because of our revenue stream that we have in our community. So again, comparisons are very difficult one by one, but we have great employees. We are fortunate we have great employees. We try to make this a great working environment. We have great residents. We have a great community. So we're very blessed with good employees. I think what Councilman Spriggs was trying to point out is that at least for our residents, we spend much less, by the way, per person in our community, in our general fund, than the other communities, especially the beach communities in San Diego County. But again, the reality and the focus on today's meeting is that, I don't know how far you want me to go, Councilman Spriggs, because I don't want to be defensive. The reality is, I think we have a group of incredible employees. We don't pay the highest, not even close, but we do try to remain competitive because we want to keep good people here. But the fully burdened rate includes a lot of things, like was mentioned. So they say salary and benefits, but those benefits are kind of different depending on what's happening. So if you were to take some of our firefighters, the firefighters' retirement system is different than the other employees. And so there's a higher amount of contribution from the city for public safety than there is for non-public safety. And then there are some costs associated with the management structure where we have different sorts of bonding. For instance, municipal employees have to be bonded. That just ensures the residents that if something goes awry, we're bonded against some of those things. So again, it's really hard to break down, but I think Mr. Adams was quite clear that he understood it to be a fully burdened rate, not just the salaries. I just wanted to clarify more, since we're talking about public safety, that when we talked about public safety workers a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about $200,000 for a sheriff's deputy, that's not their salary. And so I just wanted to make it clear to everyone so that we all stay on the same page.
Thanks, Andy.
The next speaker is Jake Stansel. Mr. Stansel, please unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to turn myself down so I don't have feedback. Hey, first off, I'm going to thank everybody in line with all my other neighbors. I want to thank the neighbors that have all chimed in or engaged with our elected officials and the city manager for putting this thing on. Appreciate everybody chiming in and being engaged in your community. Awesome to see. I've got 3 pages of notes that have been taken throughout the course of this. There's no way I'll get it out. Apologies in advance for the dog and any screaming kids because it's Saturday morning and we're in our morning routine. That being said, first point that I want to make that nobody else seems to have made yet is the potential for incentivizing nefarious activity and vagrancy by creating this new program initiative. As I see it, as I'm kind of visualizing this program in my mind in Eugene, Oregon, which is a very different demographic situation than what we have here, I see basically vagrancy and nefarious type activity being pandered to by social workers and hired healthcare practitioners that is going to incentivize that type of activity in our town. I think we might have second, third order effects from this program in that regard that we're not thinking about. So I would request that the council do further study on the draw that may occur by this type of activity. Also, I'd like to speak to the individuals who've been, from my point of view, have come across very judgmental towards the sheriff's department, specifically to response posture, with very little, obviously very little knowledge as to how law enforcement officers respond to calls for service. They respond based on demographically proven threat assessments for a given scenario. They're not just willy-nilly showing up with 5 or 6 extra deputies because they don't have anything else going on. These are professionals and they know what they're doing. So from an outsider who's viewing 3 or 4 deputies pulling up, they didn't run that license plate of that vehicle that's got 5 priors, mind you, for an example. Something to think about for those who aren't knowledgeable about law enforcement. I also don't want to see us get into a problem where the cure for the disease is more expensive. Mr. Hall, I saw on your slide that there was a vehicle that was going to be procured, an on-call paramedic, which is very expensive, a nurse is extremely expensive. I don't want to see us get into a more costly cure than what the problem is, which the desired intent that we're all trying to get to is reduction in expenditures. And we're all on board with that. We just disagree on how we're going to do it. And I'm 100% against any cuts that reduce law enforcement posture. Second to last point, I believe it was Mrs. Klink that hit on it and stole my point, but there's a very big difference between deterrence and engagement and interaction from law enforcement. There is a great deal of deterrence that occurs when a sheriff vehicle, a marked patrol vehicle, drives through an area where there's no nefarious activity. I know because I see it all the time. So if we were decreasing posture, we need to look about increasing like a citizen volunteer marked vehicle to drive through the problem areas of town where there's known drug trafficking and that sort of thing. All right, and I would like to close with the fact that I'm on a text string with 8 of my neighbors who are homeowners, coaches, parents, active duty service members, law enforcement, present and former, who are all saying without being asked that they think that the council is going to act regardless of the input that is given here today. There's a lot of distrust in local government currently, and I think you guys have an awesome opportunity here to set that right by acting in the best interests of the citizens of this town and not cutting any type of law enforcement posture. And that's all I got. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Carol Tenenbaum.
Good morning. This is the first meeting I've been able to join, and I'm really grateful to have gotten so much valuable information this morning, so thank you. I'm a retired school principal, and I took advantage of crime prevention specialist services for the schools I led in Ramona, and I know very well of how extensive their support is for the communities they serve. So my question is there already, or will there be something in place other than the City of Ivy website that informs the community of this and other services? I'm thinking perhaps especially for older residents or people with more limited tech access. I'm thinking that encouraging residents to be more proactive in using the available free services of SO and other agencies may cut back on some of the calls for deputies while a Cahoots-like program is being explored and implemented. Thank you.
The next speaker is Beatrice Blevins. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Hi, good morning. Hi, everyone. And first of all, I'd like to say, you know, for the community members here, you guys are amazing. Whether, you know, whatever side you're on, and I hate to use that term side because I don't like it. I think we should all be on the same side. But your voices are important so that we can all come together and come up with a consensus here. But with that being said, my background is in psychology, also public administration, been a social worker, mom, friend, community member, volunteer, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like, you know, for me, my study really is human behavior. So with that being said, I feel like as humans, we all have the capacity of understanding if we choose to understand. With that being said, I want the committee, the consultants, the community to bring that to the table, because, you know, we hear different stories and experiences, but it's different when you actually put yourself in a certain person's situation. So for example, going back to law enforcement and legal force and why people resist, well, you don't know their experience, you don't know their limited education, their limited sheltering, you know, their background. We have to take account for that. Now, our sheriffs, myself as a public servant too, we're expected a little more because we may have that education, we may have that experience. And these other folks that had limited experiences may not have that. So I think with that being said, I go back to how we treat the sheriff's budget, how we want to see the sheriffs in our community. I feel that there should be more community representation, meaning sheriffs getting to know the community. And I think there's some already out there that do know the community, but I think it should be expected of all sheriffs. I think when you have sheriffs that understand a 16-year-old that's causing trouble because he has too much unsupervised time, and he sees the kind of background where he's coming from. You know, fast forward a few years later, you see that child, or now an adult, you know, maybe getting into a certain situation where, you know, there's some legal consequences. Well, the sheriff will know ahead of time to treat this individual a little better. Like, for instance, you know, if they're out selling certain things on the street, like, you know, let's say lemonade or whatever, instead of going out there and, you know, reprimanding a child or a person or whomever's doing it to get a permit, how about educating that person or child and letting them know that there's other options? It doesn't take a lot. I'm the Google queen. I'm sure a lot of you here are as well. You just look it up. So I understand that sheriffs have, you know, safety first, but I also think that maybe humanizing them a little more, being part of the community, being, you know, getting to know your neighbors type of situation will come a long way. And I would love to see that implemented in this analysis that you're going to create, and whatever it is, the wonderful things that are to come, because I have faith that with community involvement, regardless of side, I think we can all come up with a good consensus. And one more thing, as an example, because I know I have 3 minutes, I'm trying to talk as fast as I can. Yesterday, I went out to Bonita, and I went to go buy mangoes from the gentleman that sells mangoes, who was recently harassed with hateful slurs. And I spoke to him, and he said his life was threatened. He felt that the sheriffs didn't take it as serious because it could lead to other harmful acts. You know, it could get physical. We've heard of people losing their lives as vendors, and that's so important that the community understand that hateful words can lead to terrorizing a person and victimizing a person and maybe even death. So again, as we were having that conversation, we were talking about the sheriffs, and he said, but they did come out, they didn't harass him, but he didn't feel that they took it serious. As we were talking, and he was being, you know, he was being respectful of the sheriffs, a sheriff's deputy comes up. Immediately, everyone was white, brown, whatever you want to color you want to say, they were all there. They got defensive and thought immediately that the sheriff was going to come up and, you know, maybe not so positive visit. Well, the sheriff comes off, gets out of the car, and he actually comes out to buy mangoes. For myself, I'll be honest, I thought the sheriff was going to come up and, you know, give him a hard time. And I'm not proud of that, right? I was assuming. However, this particular sheriff decided to come out, be part of the community, be you know, have a discussion. And for me, I saw that as a breath of fresh air, because we need to see more of that. And there, I'm not anti-police. I'm not an expert. I don't know. I believe in reallocating funds if appropriate. Yeah, I know. But anyhow, we need to see. Oh, okay. We need to see more of that. We need to see more law enforcement involved. And I know they're out there. And I think that as a part of this ad hoc committee, I feel strongly that that should be encouraged from the sheriffs. Thank you. Sorry, it took too long.
So, Councilmember Spriggs, the Mayor Pro Tem had to sign off. And so we'll turn the meeting back to you. That was the end of the public comments. I did want to respond to Mr. Stansel real quick. I didn't want to give anyone the impression that I'm an expert in cahoots or that I'm even proposing it for the city of Imperial Beach. I was reporting to the group that I had a chance to talk with the lieutenant about the cahoots program. I don't know that that is a program that's even being considered here, but more of an example of what some other locations are looking at. So just wanted to make sure to clarify that staff isn't experts, nor are we recommending we implement it. It was just a report out of a program that I had become a little bit familiar with. So that was a good point to make. And anyway, we'll turn the meeting over to you for any final comments you might have.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem McGarry had to go into another important meeting. And we'll make sure she gets brought up to date on everything that's happened since she left at 11 o'clock, just 15 minutes ago. I guess I'm once again really gratified, impressed, and thrilled with the kind of thoughtful comments that every single person has made this morning. And I've taken detailed notes on every single comment, and I know that we've recorded this and that others have been taking notes. And we're very, very serious about hearing what everyone has to say in the direction we need to go in. Now, there are, as I said in the very beginning, there are people across the spectrum of all kinds of different viewpoints in our community and on this call and on this committee public outreach effort. So we will be trying to reconcile all these different views and all this input, all of which is good when we produce the report. And I, for one, think we should reflect all of the views. We shouldn't try to homogenize everything into one sort of gray, but the recommendations, the findings and the recommendations should be based on the wide range of input that we've been getting. We have really only 2 sessions left, and the one coming up in 2 weeks, we originally had hoped that we'd have a draft report to share. Because we have been unable to get the kind of quantitative data that we would like from the sheriff that our consultants could then digest and that we could digest and see what the practices are in Imperial Beach statistically based on residency versus non-residency, based on ethnicity, based on number of emergency and types of emergencies versus non-emergency calls and what those are. We're still seeking that information so that we can make more well-informed, do a more well-informed analysis and make more well-informed recommendations. I'm hoping that we will be able to get and digest that information within the next few days or week, so that our next meeting in 2 weeks will have at least an outline of a report covering all 3 areas that we've talked about. Sheriff use of force, alternatives to existing allocation of sheriff resources, which we talked about today, and whether and how we can save budgetary expenses with respect to the largest single item in the city budget, which is the sheriff's contract, without impacting boots on the ground or actual law enforcement response capability of the sheriff. So we will be looking at those 3 areas. I hope we'll be able to have some sort of an outline or discussion points that start to pull this information together in 2 weeks. And again, I really am, and so is Mayor Pro Tem and our city staff, very appreciative of everyone's contributions. I'm suggesting where we want to go between now and our next meeting. I've not had a chance to talk with City Manager Hall about this, but I think because we have the City Council meeting in roughly 4 weeks from tomorrow, we have got to put this together as best we can. Because the data has been so slow in coming, I think we are going to absolutely do the best we can to make some recommendations based on what we know. But this almost ensures the point that Mayor Pro Tem made at the beginning, that this is the beginning of a process. This is going to be our first report ever on these issues, and probably one of the first in the county, because we're the only city working on this. And the recommendations will include what we do going forward and next steps, including ongoing efforts to learn more and to have more community input. This is not the end of the process. And I think that we've demonstrated here today and in the last 2 meetings that we really do want a fully participatory community process. This is our community and our public safety, and we want it to best serve all the residents and every resident in Imperial Beach. So I'm grateful for everyone's participation, and thank you very much, and we look forward to all of you coming back, and maybe with others as well, like we had some new participants today in our next session, where we're going to start pulling all this information together.
Councilman,
so thank you very much. Andy, do you have anything you'd like to close with?
Well, Councilman Spriggs, we do have 2 hands raised. One was a new comment that came in just as we were closing up, and then Mr. Stansel also would like to make an additional comment. So would you like to take those comments, or
sure?
Close the
Yeah.
meeting?
Yeah, we've got time. Let's do it.
Thanks for that, Mr. Spriggs. Jake Stansel here again. This is just kind of like an input. Probably why the other councilman had to depart, but I thought it was kind of ironic that during a meeting about defunding the police, we had a shooting down on, I don't think it was on Seacoast, but right next to the BFW. So hopefully everybody's okay, but just a bit of irony that took place during this meeting. That's it.
The next speaker is Allison Hoover. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Good morning, everybody. I had the opportunity to speak with Pastor John and Joey Miller, who works with the McAllister Institute, earlier this week about community situations and how we can better the community. One of the things that was brought to my attention by Joey Miller, that they have tried to contact and go with the sheriffs department, specifically from Joey, because they were not able to attend the meeting. Joey said, we wanted, as in the McAllister Institute, we wanted to go out with the Imperial Beach Substation's homeless outreach officer to see if there were areas that they weren't aware of, because they do service, I think, anywhere between 25 and 60 homeless people in Imperial Beach, and how they could better have outreach consistency in our community. And I find that to be a little concerning that the sheriff would actually stonewall these people. So if I were to put somebody at, maybe you, Mr. Hall, in touch with Joey Miller, maybe you could help assist in this process where they can better understand our needs as a community. Is this a possibility?
Yes, please. If you could have them contact me, I would appreciate it. They can send it either directly to my email address, ahall@imperialbeachca.gov, or ibmanager@imperialbeachca.gov.
Thank you.
Okay, is that the end of the comments?
Yes,
All right,
Council.
well, yeah. Again, thanks everyone for participating, and stay tuned for the announcements regarding the next meeting. And I look forward to hearing from all of you and seeing all of you at the next session, which will be the next to last one before the report is due to the City Council in mid-September. So again, thank you very much. Really sincerely appreciate everyone's time this Saturday morning. Take care, everyone.